Picture this: a lavish Beverly Hills party in 1982, champagne flowing like water, Hollywood's elite mingling beneath crystal chandeliers. In one corner stands Arnold Schwarzenegger at the peak of his Conan fame, muscles rippling beneath an expensive suit, surrounded by admirers hanging on his every word. Across the room, quiet and unassuming, stands Chuck Norris, the martial arts legend who'd recently starred in a string of action films. Arnold's eyes lock onto Chuck, and a cruel smile spreads across his face. He doesn't see a six-time world karate champion. He doesn't see a man who'd earned his black belt through blood, sweat, and discipline. No, Arnold sees an opportunity to prove he's the biggest, baddest star in the room. What happens next will become Hollywood legend, a story whispered in gyms and film sets for decades to come. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is quiet for a reason. And sometimes arrogance doesn't just get checked, it gets demolished. The party was hosted by a prominent producer celebrating his latest box office success. Everyone who was anyone had shown up, dressed to impress, eager to be seen. Arnold Schwarzenegger held court like a king, his Austrian accent booming across the marble floors as he recounted tales from the Conan set, flexing occasionally to punctuate a story, drawing laughter from the crowd that encircled him. Arnold was riding high. Bodybuilding champion turned movie star, he'd conquered two worlds through sheer force of will and an ego to match his biceps. He believed in one philosophy: dominance. Be the biggest, be the loudest. Make sure everyone knows you're the alpha. It had worked for him so far. Why change now? Chuck Norris, meanwhile, stood near the bar with a glass of water, speaking quietly with a stunt coordinator about an upcoming film. At 42, Chuck carried himself with a humility that seemed almost out of place in this city of peacocks. His suit was modest, his demeanor calm, but those who knew him understood what lay beneath that quiet exterior. A warrior's soul forged in thousands of hours of training, a man who'd faced down opponents in rings across the world, who'd earned every stripe on every belt through discipline, not showmanship. Chuck had learned long ago that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. Arnold noticed Chuck across the room, and something in him bristled. Maybe it was the way people respectfully gave Chuck space, or the genuine admiration in the eyes of the martial artist present. Arnold had heard the whispers: real fighter, legitimate champion, the genuine article. Words that, in Arnold's mind, implied he wasn't. His competitive nature flared. He excused himself from his admirers and made his way across the room, chest puffed, that trademark grin plastered across his face. But his eyes? They were calculating, predatory. "Chuck Norris!" Arnold's voice boomed. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. "The karate guy! I've been wanting to meet you." Chuck extended his hand politely. "Good to meet you, Arnold. Congratulations on Conan's success." Arnold's handshake was aggressive, crushing, a test. Chuck's expression didn't change, though he registered the challenge immediately. He'd felt this energy before, insecurity masked as dominance. "You know," Arnold continued, voice loud enough for the growing crowd to hear, "I've been thinking about doing some martial arts training for my next film. Maybe you could teach me some of those, what do you call them, kata?" He pronounced it mockingly, drawing snickers from his entourage. Chuck's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "It's about discipline and respect, Arnold. Not something you pick up for a movie role." Arnold's smile widened, but it was cold now. He sensed an audience and couldn't resist. "Respect? Come on, Chuck. It's choreographed fighting, right? Movie stuff. Not like real combat. Not like what we do on set with real stunts, real danger." He flexed his arm dramatically. "I mean, no offense, but breaking boards? That's a nice parlor trick. But in a real fight, against a real man?" He gestured to his massive frame. The room went quiet. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Several people shifted uncomfortably. A few of Chuck's students, there as stunt performers, looked ready to intervene. But Chuck raised a hand subtly, calming them without words. Inside, Chuck felt the familiar surge. Not anger, but disappointment. Another loud man confusing size with strength, ego with power. He'd met dozens like Arnold in his journey. The difference was, he'd never had to prove anything to them before. He'd learned to walk away, to let the insecure ones posture and preen. But something about this moment felt different. This wasn't a gym or a tournament. This was a public humiliation attempt, a bully trying to diminish decades of discipline in front of Hollywood's elite. And worse, Chuck saw young martial artists in the crowd, his students watching to see how their teacher would respond to disrespect. Arnold, Chuck said quietly, his voice steady but carrying a new edge, strength isn't about how loud you are or how big your muscles look. It's about knowing yourself, controlling yourself. That's real power. Arnold laughed, looking around for validation. Big talk from a little karate man. Tell you what, why don't you show me some of this real power? Right here, right now. Unless you're scared. In that moment, Chuck's mind flashed back to Korea, 1968. He was stationed at Osan Air Force Base, stepping into his first Tangsu de Dojang, a nobody airman who'd never thrown a serious punch. He remembered his master, a weathered Korean man who moved like water and struck like lightning, teaching him that martial arts wasn't about fighting. It was about becoming someone worth respecting. He remembered the countless hours, bloody knuckles on makiwara boards, failing again and again, learning that true mastery meant mastering yourself first. He remembered his first tournament, facing an opponent who mocked his style, who thought size mattered more than technique. He remembered the lesson he'd learned that day. Arrogance creates openings that skill can exploit. Chuck looked at Arnold now and saw not an enemy, but a student who'd never had a real teacher, a man who'd built an empire on his body, but neglected his spirit. Okay, Arnold, Chuck said calmly, but not here. The courtyard, just you and me. No audience, no cameras. If you really want to understand what martial arts is about, I'll show you. But you have to give me your word. What happens out there stays between us. No boasting, no stories. Can your ego handle that? Arnold's grin faltered for a split second. He'd expected Chuck to back down, but pride wouldn't let him refuse now. Lead the way, karate man. The courtyard was illuminated by moonlight and soft garden lights. A few close friends had followed despite Chuck's request, including the producer and a handful of stunt coordinators who sensed something significant was about to happen. Arnold stripped off his jacket, rolling his massive shoulders. At 6'2" and 235 pounds of muscle, he looked like a Greek god. Chuck, 5 inches shorter and 60 pounds lighter, simply stood quietly, centering his breathing. Whenever you're ready, Chuck said simply. Arnold charged forward like a bull, trying to use his size to overwhelm. But Chuck wasn't there. He'd shifted with minimal movement, just enough to redirect Arnold's momentum. Arnold stumbled, caught himself, spun around confused. Come on, Arnold. Really try, Chuck said, no mockery in his voice, just stating fact. Arnold came again, faster, throwing a heavy punch meant to prove his raw power. Chuck didn't block. He redirected, using Arnold's own force against him, stepping inside the punch and applying a simple wrist lock that sent Arnold to one knee. For 3 minutes it continued. Every attack Arnold launched met empty air or found itself redirected, controlled, neutralized. Chuck never struck him, never hurt him, just demonstrated over and over the difference between muscle and mastery, between force and technique. Finally, breathing hard, Arnold swung wild in frustration. Chuck caught the arm, applied pressure to 3 specific points, and Arnold found himself on his back, staring up at the stars. Chuck's hand on his chest. Not pressing, just resting there with enough control that Arnold understood completely. This could end however Chuck wanted it to. Chuck stepped back, offered his hand. After a long moment, Arnold took it, allowing Chuck to pull him up. The Austrian's face was flushed, whether from exertion or embarrassment, no one could tell. You understand now? Chuck asked quietly. It's not about boards or tricks. It's about thousands of hours of practice, of discipline, of learning to control power rather than just possess it. Your strength is impressive, Arnold, but uncontrolled strength is just violence looking for direction. Arnold stood silent for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. The performer in him wanted to laugh it off, make an excuse, but the competitor in him, the part that had driven him to 5 Mr. Universe titles, recognized when he'd been beaten by someone simply better. Arnold started, then stopped. I apologize, Chuck. That was disrespectful. You're right. I didn't understand. I saw the movies, the demonstrations, and thought I knew, but I didn't know anything. Chuck nodded. The strongest people are often the quietest, Arnold. They have nothing to prove. Remember that. The two men walked back inside together. The dynamic completely changed. Arnold, to his credit, never spoke publicly about what happened that night. But those who were there noticed a shift in him. A little less bluster, a little more respect for disciplines he didn't understand. Years later, Arnold and Chuck would become genuine friends, the mutual respect forged that night forming the foundation. Arnold would credit Chuck in private conversations with teaching him an essential lesson, that true confidence doesn't need to diminish others to elevate itself. The story reminds us that the person who talks the loudest is rarely the strongest. Real power, whether physical, mental, or spiritual, doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need validation or constant proof. It simply exists, quiet and unshakable, rooted in years of discipline, humility, and genuine mastery. The martial artist doesn't fight to prove superiority. They train to prove nothing, to no one but themselves. And when forced to demonstrate their skill, they do so not with ego or cruelty, but with the same discipline that earned them that skill in the first place. So the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their volume, their size, or their bravado, remember Chuck Norris in that courtyard, quiet, centered, and absolutely in control. Because at the end of the day, the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one who has nothing to prove. True strength doesn't roar. It whispers, and the wise listen.